This podcast contains our own personal views not associated with any organisation. Coronial contains descriptions of death inquests that may be graphic and disturbing to some listeners. Discretion is advised. All right, everyone. Welcome back to Coronial. I'm Georgie.
I'm Emma.
And I'm Alice.
All right, this week I'm going to be telling you about the inquiry into the Orroral Valley fire. And this was a recent inquest released in the Australian Capital Territory on the 13th of June 2025.
Wow, so very recent. I have not heard about this.
Me neither.
It's with regards to the fire that happened in January of 2020.
Okay.
So the summer of 2019 to 2020 saw a particularly catastrophic bushfire season in the southeast of Australia. Bushfires were raging between Canberra in the Australian Capital Territory and the south coast of New South Wales. In response to the concerns about the bushfire threats, so prior to bushfires actually happening, in the ACT, an emergency controller was appointed in early January 2020. An emergency coordination centre was then established to host a multi-agency incident management team, which brought together key stakeholders on days of heightened fire danger. This team was responsible for coordinating emergency responses, including deployment and management of resources. As part of this response, the Australian Defence Force, or I'm going to refer to them as ADF from now on, provided aid to civil authorities upon request in a number of locations and capacities. And this was through the Defence Assistance to the Civil Community Initiative, or DAC, D-A-C-C. I don't know if there's like a formal way of referring to that, but anyway. Similarly, the ADF had been providing assistance through this initiative within the state of New South Wales, known as Operation Bushfire Assist. Creative name.
Very.
And shortened to OPBFA. And this has been occurring since late 2019. So I think the risk or threats may have been higher in New South Wales to begin with earlier in the season.
Okay.
Specialist ADF liaison officers were embedded within the Emergency Coordination Centre to operate as the point of contact between the ADF and the Emergency Coordination Centre, noting that one's civilian, one's army.
Gotcha.
In early January, the ADF formed the Multinational Rotary Wing Task Group to establish command arrangements for multiple rotary wing assets to provide support in OPBFA.
And when we're talking about rotary wings, we're talking about planes that can...
Helicopters.
Okay.
That makes
It was
sense.
a
true.
long-winded way of saying we got some helicopters involved.
Yeah.
Great.
So one such task that the ADF assisted with was aerial reconnaissance of remote helipads or helicopter landing zones across the ACT. This was conducted in order to assess whether they were safe for landing should a fire occur nearby.
Mm-hmm.
Remote area access within the ACT was difficult at this time due to movement through the park being constrained by a significant amount of undergrowth. Essentially, driving cars was not possible because of how overgrown the areas were.
So they had not been doing any hazard reduction burns
No.
in the ACT?
It's unclear, but the coroner noted that the surrounding areas had not had fire since 2003.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I remember those
So-
big Canberra bushfires in 2003.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that was the last time they'd...
had a big bushfire burn through,
Yeah.
and therefore there were high fuel loads and low moisture content that meant that if a new ignition was not responded to quickly and safely...
It'd be catastrophic.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That it'd grow rapidly and cause significant damage. So in terms of the maintenance in between 2003 and
Doesn't
2020,
sound like there was any.
it didn't provide any
backburning.
information about what had occurred.
Yeah, right. Interesting that wasn't part of the inquest, but I'm sure we'll get to the actual substance of the
Yeah.
inquest.
That's fair. I didn't really think of it like that, but yeah, it wasn't mentioned at all as to like,
Yeah.
should they not have been doing preventative maintenance? I don't know what the area is like. Is it possible there's areas maybe that are so mountainous that you can't get to? I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, and that any fires that would occur would cause significant damage to water catchment areas, sensitive ecological zones, rural properties, and had the potential to impact urban Canberra, which is Australia's capital.
Maybe that's the reason, the ecological impacts of
bush burning
or backburning through that area might have.
Yeah, maybe. But
you feel like it's going to happen eventually.
Yeah, exactly. It happens everywhere in Australia eventually.
Exactly.
You're better off doing a small burns more
correct.
frequently.
Unless it's correctly maintained.
Yeah.
I don't have a good answer here of I don't know what the reason behind why not. And then I also don't know the reason behind why that wasn't considered as part of the inquest.
Yeah. Just because that area is at risk of catastrophic bushfires from 2003. And I'm sure there were many bushfires prior to that as well. I just very specifically remember the Canberra 2003 bushfires. Yeah, it's a known bushfire risk zone. You would think that they would be doing something to...
And they probably are doing something, but, either way, there's still going to be a high risk in that area. It's still a national park.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. You can't just, unless you literally flatten it, there's going to be a high risk.
Yeah, which you can't do because, again, the ecological impacts that would have.
So aerial reconnaissance was undertaken solely by ADF personnel. During this reconnaissance, photographs and observation notes were to be taken to facilitate the triage of potential sites, which might require clearing. Then any remediation work required would be performed in conjunction with ADF personnel who were accompanied by the Australian Capital Territory Parks and Conservation Service.
Okay.
And these officers would be equipped with handheld radios, water, and clearing equipment suitable for firefighting as a safety strategy.
Okay, that makes sense.
So basically, aerial review followed by then actually going down, at which point you take a little bit more for safety.
Yep.
Seems fair. So on the 27th of January 2020, according to the Bureau of Meteorology, it was a hot day with gusting winds and was a very high fire risk across the Australian Capital Territory. One of the ADF teams tasked to carry out the helicopter landing zone surveillance and clearance work were flying an Australian Regulatory Army MRH-90 helicopter, and this was with the call signal Angel 21. So I'm going to refer to the team as Angel 21 from now on.
Okay.
And we'll talk about an MRH-90 helicopter later, so save your questions. Prior to commencing the flight for the day, the aircraft captain was required to obtain approval from an authorising officer. They agreed upon a plan which included departure from Richmond, which is 300 kilometres north of Canberra in New South Wales, at 8:30 in the morning. There'd be a stop in Canberra, 2 refuels at another site called Mildura. One of these was prior to them conducting the surveillance and the other on the a return trip back to Richmond.
Yep.
And then they were anticipated to return by 6 p.m. that evening. It was noted that there was a 30% probability of decreased visibility during their flight. Other pre-flight risks discussed included refueling risks, passenger management, traffic, possible storms, and mountainous terrain, which they're in the air. I have questions, but that's fine.
Well, I guess in case of emergency landing.
Yeah, fair. The authorising officer was satisfied that the flight was appropriately planned and that appropriate risk mitigation was in place. There was no discussion regarding the possibility of other landings or any other risks that might be associated with landing throughout that trip. 2 pilots and 2 crewmen commenced preparations for the flight at 7 a.m, and then Angel 21 departed at 8:35 and landed in Canberra at 9:48. 2 further crew members boarded in Canberra, and they would have the role of photographer and note taker during the task. The helicopter lifted off and travelled via Mildura for refuelling and then made its way to Namidji National Park to commence surveillance. They flew to a number of identified helicopter landing zones and circuited at each. At 1:33 in the afternoon, one crew member asked if there was any chance of a toilet break. There was some contention in the inquest between the various people providing evidence about the reason for this break. One stated that it was because one of the passengers was experiencing motion sickness, but the coroner found the evidence did not support this and that the reason was not important other than noting it was not an emergency landing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it was like an impromptu but scheduled stop.
Wasn't scheduled. They weren't planning on stopping in the whole trip, but it was an impromptu
Stop.
but decided upon
Requested.
versus emergency landing where it's
Yes.
like we're falling out of the sky.
Yeah,
It was
okay.
like we are doing a controlled landing.
Yep, okay.
It also happened to coincide with around lunchtime.
Oh,
I don't know
okay.
if that helps. Like, you know, it's 1:30 in the afternoon.
Not really.
Yeah,
but-
it might be that, like,
They were going to sit and just eat lunch.
yeah,
But could you not do that in the helicopter?
at least one of the pilots wouldn't be able to eat their lunch.
Yeah, but they can just swap.
Yeah,
Yes,
salsies.
they can.
Anyway, Angel 21 landed at 1:38. A crew member got out of the aircraft straight away while the others remained either in the cockpit or the rear of the helicopter. About 50 seconds after landing, one of the crew in the rear of the helicopter noticed a fire in the region of the left sponson of the helicopter. For everyone
What's the
who's
sponsor?
yeah, everyone playing at home, a sponson is like basically the back leg of the helicopter.
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, the back bit. The fire was directly under the aircraft and spreading fast under the fuselage.
Wait, hang on. The fire wasn't there when they were approaching to land.
Yep.
But then they landed.
Yeah, and it's
and
under the aircraft.
less than a minute later, there's a fire underneath the helicopter.
Yes.
So it's probably caused by the helicopter.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
Terrifying.
1 minute and 4 seconds after landing, they took off again.
Was the...
So they're
Oh,
like,
no.
it's on fire, let's take off.
Pretty
Well, I mean,
much.
yes, they didn't want to catch on fire themselves. Was the
Yeah, but
person
they were
who'd
already
gone
on
for
fire.
a pee back?
Either only halfway through or they
And
had
were
the
told-
quickest wee in their life because they got back in that helicopter
Yeah,
and
okay,
they
so
took
they
off
didn't
again.
leave them behind.
No,
Okay,
they did
that's
not leave
good.
them behind.
I'm glad.
All of them were in the helicopter,
Okay,
so
good.
I don't know how that went down, but yeah,
Okay.
they were all able to get up there. Initially, the helicopter hovered over the ignition point at about 10 to 20 feet prior to circling the valley in order to assess the airworthiness of the aircraft and whether it was necessary to land somewhere else.
So was the aircraft on fire at this point?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not good.
Oh,
Well,
no.
it wasn't on fire, but it had fire damage.
It has fire damage.
Yes,
to it.
right, because the fire was underneath it. So
Yes.
it would have... Yep.
But it was caused obviously by something from the helicopter igniting the grass or
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the downdraft from the aircraft during the initial hover likely served to accelerate the fire.
Yep.
The airworthiness of the aircraft was assessed by two of the crew member leaning out of the rear doors of the helicopter face down to gain visual assessment of the underside of the helicopter. They observed blistering paint and burning of the composite material of the helicopter. The location of the fire was recorded by photographs before they then made their way away from the fire.
Are they radioing anyone at this point?
Not currently.
No, they're just doing their initial assessments first to work out.
Yeah,
what's
I
going
get
on.
that. So you got some crew members doing that. The pilots could absolutely be already on the radio saying, hey, there's a fire here.
No, so the pilots were coordinating with the crewmen around what's the damage to the
Okay.
helicopter right now.
Mm.
Are we about to fall out of the sky?
Yeah, one thing
Okay,
at a
they were
time.
concerned about their own self-preservation.
Yes. As they
Seems
left
fair.
the valley, the fire was estimated to be approximately 200 by 200 meters in area and spreading quickly.
Yikes.
That got big quick.
Yep. Okay. An emergency call to air traffic control was made at 1:45, which was 6 minutes and 50 seconds after the ignition of the fire.
Mhm.
So they called someone 6 minutes and 50 seconds after.
That's a long time, but anyway.
It is, yeah.
They're trying to make sure they're not about to fall out of the sky.
Which is fair enough.
Angel 21 landed at the Canberra airport at 1:58, where fire and rescue were notified of the fire and a further response was dispatched to the fire. In the first 24 hours, the fire spread across approximately 2,600 hectares. It grew by approximately 5,000 to 8,000 hectares per day over the subsequent 3 days. Unfavorable conditions saw the fire grow by approximately 26,000 hectares on the 1st of February 2020, when it also spread across the southeastern border of ACT at Clear Range and thereafter became known as the Clear Range Fire in New South Wales.
That's so huge. Like,
That's massive.
The fire burned for over 5 weeks.
my God.
Yep. In total, 78% of the Namidji National Park was burnt. That's approximately 82,700 hectares.
Wow. Just from that one fire.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to butcher this name, but Tidbinabilla Nature Reserve was also affected with 1,400 hectares or 22% burnt. The Cotter River catchment area, the ACT's primary water supply, was also adversely affected by the fire. There was significant loss of domestic and wild flora and fauna, wide environmental damage, damage to Indigenous and other sites of cultural significance, and significant property damage to land holdings. Thankfully, no human life was lost.
Same face. I was like, is this a coroner's inquest or?
And this is why I win at the coronial inquest game.
Because you did one that didn't include human death.
Yeah. So I learned reading this inquest that Section 18 of the Coroner's Act of ACT provides the coroner jurisdiction in relation to fires, stating that a coroner may, at the request of an owner-occupier of destroyed or damaged property, or at the coroner's own initiative, hold an inquiry into the cause and origin of a fire if the coroner considers that the inquiry should be held. So the question of this inquiry into this fire arose as a result of requests made to the Chief Coroner of ACT on behalf of the residents of Bumbalong in New South Wales. Ultimately, the coroner was satisfied that an own motion inquiry was warranted. And so the logistics of this being that, because it said they could do it on behalf of the residents of destroyed property or their own initiative.
Yeah.
But they're the coroner of ACT and they were being asked by the residents of New South Wales, so therefore outside of their jurisdiction.
Right.
So that's why they ultimately decided that it would be an own motion.
Yeah.
They initially sort of made it sound like therefore they were just going to cover ACT and ignore what happened in New South Wales. And this actually went to the Supreme Court of ACT, which resulted in the ability for it to cover both the ACT and New South Wales residents who had lost property under a essentially court order that the coroner could therefore cover both jurisdictions.
Yeah, which makes sense.
Interesting.
But also wild that it has to go to that lengths in order to be able to do that.
And I was thinking this through and being like, why did that happen? And I assume it's just because like it's so written into the legislation that the coroner was like, I can't do this unless there is a court order.
Yeah, because all states and territories have sovereignty.
Yeah.
So,
and they
it has
that.
to be that way.
Yeah. But the issue is they could decide to hold their own inquest under their own determination for something that didn't involve any deaths, which most people think is not the primary reason for a coroner.
Well, it isn't the primary reason for
coroner. Yeah. So, like, they could determine to hold their own inquest, but they couldn't determine that it should therefore be across borders.
Jurisdictional.
Yeah. It's weird. Like, I just find that interesting. But again, I'm sure it's just the way it's written.
I was about to say, because that's a provision that's in the Act, in the ACT one at least. We don't know what other jurisdictions are like, but you can't cross borders.
Yeah.
The only other solution would be that both states or
conduct their own.
Yeah, do their own, which is a waste of time.
Absolutely. Well, not especially in the context of no deaths, but like there'd be no incentive for the New South Wales coroner, I think, to necessarily do it if the ACT coroner had chosen to do their own motion in the context of there being no death.
And it also originated in the ACT.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
So it's kind of ACT's fault.
But that being said, we've already covered ones where like the death originated or the cause originated in another state.
Elsewhere, but remember there are like, provisions written into different legislation where it's like
things,
But that's in the case of a death.
Yeah.
Whereas this
and look, I haven't read every single state's cover to cover. Anyway, so the coroner sought to investigate the cause of the fire, the operational activities of the ADF and primarily their risk assessments that they performed, the interagency communications between the ADF and the emergency services of ACT and the Parks and Conservation Service, and any reporting undertaken by the ADF personnel in relation to the cause, ignition and location of the fire, the circumstances surrounding the emergency services becoming aware of the fire and their response, and then the effect of any delay on reporting of the ignition of the fire to emergency services. So in terms of the cause of the fire, the Angel 21 crew were flying in an Australian Regulatory Army multi-role helicopter 90 Taipan, or what I shorten to MRH 90, or what is well known as an MRH 90. It's just a specific type of helicopter.
Got that.
It's a twin-engine utility lift helicopter, which is able to provide troop lift capability or medical evacuation. It's primarily constructed with modern composite materials that are lighter and stronger than aircraft aluminium. And it was painted in camouflage colours.
Cool. Of course.
Because it's an army vehicle.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, this composite structure can continue to burn and degrade after being in contact with fire.
Right. That's not good.
Not ideal. The fuel bladder is also located under the floor of the helicopter.
Also
not ideal when it says alight from underneath.
Yes.
The helicopter is equipped with a number of external communication systems, including a SATCOM radio, a high frequency, very high frequency, and ultra high frequency radios, and an encrypted FM radio. The helicopter also has 2 lights that can be used, a landing infrared light and a searchlight. The searchlight may be extended or stowed, and when it's stowed, it sits approximately 35 centimetres from the ground, depending on fuel loads and cabin weight. When it's extended, with the aircraft fully fueled and configured for air mobile operations, the searchlight sits a mere 15 centimetres above the ground.
Oh, it was the light, wasn't it?
It was the light.
And it was extended?
Yeah, because there was 30% visibility
That's right.
obstruction. And so they wanted to make sure that they would be able to see across the helicopter pads that they were surveilling.
But then also a light, if they've turned it on, inherently gets hot.
And
even
hot.
if it's not turned on, if the sun shining on it would probably heat it up.
Not enough, I think, to set anything on fire.
Okay, but it was turned on.
Yes, it was turned on.
Okay, so this is like a child with a magnifying glass on a really hot day.
Yep.
Setting a fire.
But on testing, it was found that after operating for 10 minutes, the center of the glass lens of the searchlight has a temperature range between, and do you want to play this game? You want to provide some guesses?
120 degrees.
Hotter.
165.
Hotter.
200 degrees.
I'm going to put you out of your misery. 340 to 546 degrees Celsius.
What? Why? No wonder it caused a fire.
Yes. Further testing found that when the light was at 500 degrees with a wind speed of just 4 kilometers per hour, the time to glowing ignition below was only 16 seconds.
Yeah.
Wow.
And given that they took off within a minute and 4 seconds or whatever, like...
Yeah, plenty of time.
That's
it probably
exactly...
did start in about 20 seconds or thereabouts.
Yeah. So this, unsurprisingly, was sufficient to ignite the grass.
Yep.
As found by the coroner.
Especially with the conditions that were happening that day.
Yeah.
Hot,
or that whole
dry.
summer.
Yep. Windy.
Wind.
Yeah. And so it was accepted by all involved that the heat from the searchlight of the Angel 21 helicopter caused ignition of the Orroral Valley fire on the 27th of January 2020.
I feel like that issue was almost inevitable, that it was going to cause a bushfire somewhere at some point, because if they were searching for like helipad landing spots.
Yeah, but they weren't meant to land initially, but then they were going to. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But would the searchlight have been necessarily on for
Well,
the
I'd
ones
assume
they
so for
landed
helicopters that are going through bushfire zones. There's going to be decreased visibility, so they're going to have their
So at
searchlights
this point, there wasn't any bushfire.
But I'm just saying, like, in the future.
Yeah. So the guidelines for pilots in respect to a particular aircraft were its flight manual. And the flight manual for the MRH-90 did not identify the risk relating to heat emanating from searchlights on the aircraft. However, it was identified during an aviation safety investigation that followed this fire that a similar incident had previously occurred. In 2013, a Black Hawk landing light ignited a grass fire on a civilian property, and the remedial actions arising out of this event included the addition of a caution in the operating procedure for the Black Hawk helicopters.
But only the Black Hawk helicopters?
Correct. No such updates were made to the operating procedure for other aircraft with searchlights. Therefore, this information was not readily available to crew members in order for them to proactively identify the risk.
Disappointing.
Furthermore, one of the crew members on the Angel 21 reported that a few years prior to the Orroral Valley fire, they had witnessed an MRH-90 landing on grass with the searchlight on, causing the grass to smoulder but not ignite. There was no evidence as to what, if any, follow-up there was on that particular occasion.
Yeah, sounds like probably nothing.
Yeah. In August 2020, so a little after 6 months after the fire, an engineering change proposal to modify the landing and searchlights to LED was rejected within the ADF.
Why?
Following a cost-benefit analysis. Cost-benefit.
the
Is your
cost
answer.
of burning however many thousand hectares of land.
But it wouldn't benefit them enough. Sorry, that's me making some speculation. That's allegedly.
Well, look, if they did a cost-benefit analysis and they didn't do it, that means they weren't getting enough benefit for the cost.
Yeah, true. And then I did just look it up, and I presume an LED light emits less heat.
Yes.
And that was confirmed by the internet. Okay, so the risk assessments performed in relation to all of the operation activities, so not just the light in general. From the 16th of January 2020, a task unit, Taipan, operated from the Royal Australian Air Force, so RAF base in Richmond, New South Wales, under the Strategic Bushfire Management Plan, which was created under the Australian Capital Territory Emergencies Act. This is things that happened in order to get the army involved.
Oh, yeah.
The Taipan unit was the specific task unit involved in the aerial reconnaissance. So, like, they had, 4 helicopters or something going around doing stuff.
Yep.
The task unit included ADF officers suitable to manage, operate, and crew these 4 helicopters, and included an operations officer who liaised with internal and external operatives to ensure that required helicopter assets were available and efficiently tasked. There was an ops cell, and they were otherwise known as the 2 Alpha, who monitored communications from the task unit's helicopters. There was also an authorization officer, a troop commander who was responsible for preparing standard operating procedures for the task unit, pilots and air crewmen.
Can I just talk about the irony of this task force operation being set up to help?
I know, right?
Help with bushfires that ends up setting one that's really, really, really big.
Yep.
Fortunately, no deaths, but
Yes, but
so
the
much
hectares,
damage.
the damage,
so much damage.
That was in 2020. How much of that would have even started regrowing at this point?
Or even just all the people who lost
properties as well.
and livestock and animals. And,
And even just, the native vegetation and animals.
Yeah, it'll take years worth of redevelopment.
And in the case of the cultural sites, possibly never getting that back.
True. In light of the various work that was being engaged in by the ADF units under OP BFA, risk management planning was delegated to each individual unit. So basically, because this was just one of the task units and they were doing the aerial reconnaissance, but then there were a bunch of other task units doing other things. They're like, you guys figure out your own risk management.
Which kind of makes sense in a way because they're doing such diverse tasks.
Yeah, and they couldn't make risk managements appropriate to all the units.
Yeah.
So on the 14th of January, so remember the fire happened or started on the 28th, so 2 weeks before, an aviation risk management plan was approved. It identified a number of environmental and operational risks, but it was a pretty broad plan and hence didn't go into detail that would be required to identify the risk of a fire relating to the activated searchlight when landing.
Yep.
The plan did state, due to very poor visibility and dense traffic within the AO, and it never actually defined what AO is, but I assume aerial operation. Yeah. Searchlights would be switched on and extended. So they did have a directive to use their searchlight.
Okay.
From the 31st of January, so 3 days after the fire, a revised version of this included the statement, due to the heightened risk of unintended fire ignition, ensure the searchlight is switched off and stowed prior to coming within 10 feet of the ground or any vegetation. Consideration should be given to the residual heat that will remain post turning the searchlight off.
Absolutely.
No data is available that outlines the level of heat on a recently used searchlight or on the heat required to cause an unintended fire.
Yeah, so that's well and good to say, yep, turn it off and stow it away, but they then identify the fact that we don't actually know how long before
it cools
you
down.
land or you get close to the ground that you need to turn that off and stow it.
Yeah.
So do it, but also we don't actually know how.
And they said when
soon.
it's stowed, it would only be 35 centimeters off the ground. So if you're landing where there's any vegetation around, and if it's 500 degrees, it's not cooling down quickly.
No.
Especially if the outside temperature is already 30 to 40 degrees. Yep. But anyway, I guess it was at least we've put some thought into this, which is good. But also by then the fire was already raging. So
Yeah.
An aviation safety investigation report, so happened after all of this was done, found that the risk associated with the potential fire damage to the MRH-90 were not identified in any planning or risk management processes, which we knew.
Yeah.
The development of risk management plans by the task unit did not follow the risk management processes in accordance with the Defence Aviation Safety Manual. So basically the way that they were meant to make risk management plans, they didn't really follow anyway.
Right. And even though those plans were approved.
Yes, but I think the broader defence safety, risk management planning stuff, it was all super high level. And so then when you break it down to that point, it never really directed enough information anyway. The Aviation Safety Investigation Team also concluded that the risk management processes was not properly understood across multiple elements of the Army aviation community. So similar, they just weren't really well understood risk management plans in the first place, or how to develop them. The Aviation Risk Management Plan also detailed communication expectations for aircraft crew members. The plan detailed that communications were to be primarily delivered to the OPSEL or the 2 Alpha via a SATCOM radio, with FM radio and text message via a phone app being secondary alternatives. Information provided was to include flight follow method, which is essentially just providing 30-minute updates as you're flying around across the day.
Okay. Yeah.
So that they know where you are.
That's fair.
And as part of this, so to pass back as much information as possible regarding current weather and pertinent information such as evacuees, cargo, anything else that was relevant to what they were doing. The evidence provided at the inquest was that there was uncertainty on the part of the ADF personnel as to whether there was an obligation to report wheels up, wheels down during mission-specific landings or to any other landings that were occurring during the flight. So it was unclear whether they were expected to state when they were taking off and landing just at the beginning and the end of the day or at specific airports that they had planned to go to.
Yeah, when they're refueling.
Yeah, or whether they specifically needed to notify someone of the fact that they had chosen to do this impromptu land.
Right.
The overarching consensus of the ADF witnesses was that an aircraft captain has the discretion to land. So that either way, whether they were reporting to whoever else external to the aircraft, that it was their discretion as to whether they were landing or not.
Okay.
However, one of the ADF incident controllers did give evidence that had he been made aware of an aircraft engaged in reconnaissance considering an unplanned landing, he would have questioned their need to do so and possibly discussed the safest options for landing.
Okay, so he wouldn't have been able to say definitively you can't do that.
Yeah.
But may have had a discussion about how about you land somewhere else?
Yeah. How necessary is it to land right here?
Can you hold it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The coroner noted that following the fire, no reformulation or refinement of the aviation risk management plan occurred with regards to this landing stuff. And therefore, the coroner understood that the ADF's intent about whether and where to land was intended to remain squarely and solely with the aircraft captain. So basically, they never changed what they said about the wheels up, wheels down.
Yep.
So therefore, they felt that that was an adequate way of phrasing things, which is interesting given at the inquest that all the witnesses were like, I don't really know if we have to tell people if we land, if it's not in the plan. Other than, I presume, emergency landings you tell people about.
Yeah.
Yes, but that's mainly because you need help.
Yeah. The coroner concluded that if the possibility of an unscheduled landing under those conditions had been fully understood, choosing to proceed, especially without first consulting the ACT emergency services, would have been extremely foolhardy. However, noting that the aircrew were unaware of the risks associated with the activated searchlight on the MRH-90, the coroner made no criticism of the decision to land.
That's fair.
Yeah.
The coroner rather felt that there was an organisational failure by not recognising the risk based on the Black Hawk experience and the failure to assess and document the risk in the MRH-90 flight manual.
Agreed.
Overall, the coroner found the fire was unlikely to have arisen had the air crew been made aware of the risk of fire associated with landing or with landing while the searchlights were activated.
Mm-hmm.
This reflects systemic failure to apply the lessons learnt in one context, that is the Black Hawk experience, to the broader yet patently likely context of another aircraft utilizing similar technologies. Okay. The interagency communications between the ADF and the ACT emergency services. So I'm going to go into a bit of detail about the communications and the way that they could communicate between themselves. Again, this is mainly around the fact that it's an Army task unit versus civilian emergency services. So the radios on the MRH-90 are able to communicate with other aircraft on the Common Traffic Advisory frequency, the Fire Common Traffic Advisory frequency. Never heard of that one before, but apparently that's a thing. The relevant ops cell monitoring the flight, and as I said, this could be through like the FM radio, the SATCOM, or personal mobile devices, as well as air traffic control. The Angel 21 air crew gave evidence during the inquest that the SATCOM and radios were intermittently unreliable in the areas of operation during OP BFA. And again, I assume that's just because they're going through mountainous areas and valleys and things like that where reception is going to be patchy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
The MRH-90 also had an internal communication system which enabled the pilots, aircrewmen and passengers to talk to each other. It's a helicopter, it's loud.
Yes. Yeah, you always see them wearing the headphones.
Little headphones.
It was expected that whilst a task was being executed, the pilots on a particular task would be in contact with their ops cell who would monitor the task. That ops cell was then able to communicate with commanders embedded within the emergency control centre or other ADF personnel. And within the emergency control centre was where like civilian base was.
Okay.
During Angel 21's flight, reports were made every 30 minutes to their ops cell that was tracking the flight. And their last check-in prior to the ignition of the fire was at 1:26. So, I don't know, like 12 minutes before the actual fire started.
Okay.
Something around that. Which is interesting because, like, they then didn't feel the need to communicate that they were landing. But anyway. So in relation to this, a critical information reporting requirement was issued on the 15th of January 2020. So in relation to communications. And this stated, the primary point of contact should always be the immediate supervisor up through the applicable task unit commander or something called an air element commander. And they will report to a commanding officer by phone in the first instance. Where either the unit commander or air element commander are unavailable, notification should be directed to the commanding officer. Where the commanding officer is unavailable, the incident should be notified to, and then they just listed some other various ADF personnel.
Okay.
Each of them were code names that made no sense to me.
Fair enough.
Most of the critical information reporting requirements will be incidents that require external reporting within specified timelines. All external reporting will be managed by the commanding officer and or a nominated delegate. It was highlighted in the inquest that this notification essentially gave no provision for direct communications between the Angel 21 crew and emergency services or essentially civilians in any way whatsoever. It just was like everything goes through the Army and then that will be delegated to be externally communicated.
Right.
The pilot of the helicopter had contact details for an on-ground ADF officer, including one located within the Emergency Services Command Centre, but did not have any other direct contact methods. Additionally, the crew members had personal mobile phones capable of communicating externally.
What?
They all had their phones on them.
Yeah, they could have called 000.
Exactly.
It's not practical to make phone calls while you're in a helicopter from your personal devices.
I mean, yeah, that makes sense because they
noise.
wouldn't be able to hear anything.
Yeah. But text messaging applications were able to be used.
Yep.
So it wasn't your standard text message, but they had some sort of Army issue option.
Okay.
The critical information reporting requirement did not anticipate the need to notify other relevant civilian authorities, such as the fire service. And this includes even if a fire was spotted, let alone caused by them, even though the purpose of their involvement was to assist with reducing the risk of fire or responding to bushfires.
They were still expected to go through the entirety of the Army hierarchy. Not obviously the entirety of it.
Yeah, but like it
they were
seems
still
like a right.
expected to go through the Army.
I don't know that they were expected, but there was no provision about what to do outside of contacting the Army.
Right.
And then the only way that they could contact the Army was through the unreliable radio on the helicopter.
Yep.
Or like what is essentially like text message based services, because again, they couldn't really make great phone calls.
Yeah.
to someone on the ground that wasn't necessarily co-located with civilian emergency services.
Oh, that's a terrible system.
Yes. Even though there was a potential that they would want to contact emergency services if they saw a fire.
I think it was highly likely
Absolutely.
that they would end up seeing a fire at some point.
The coroner stated, ordinarily, such a response would be expected as common sense to be able to contact emergency services if they saw a fire.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, and obviously they could communicate with air traffic control, which I guess is technically civilian. But, yeah. During briefings, the difficulty regarding communication between ADF aircrafts and the incident management teams was identified, as the ADF had no agency radio they could be contacted on. So equally, the people in the emergency services couldn't contact the ADF particularly well either.
Yep.
This was the reason behind the ADF liaison officer being embedded with the emergency management team to facilitate communications. But even then, did it actually facilitate much?
Yeah, if they can't get hold of them.
Not from an emergency perspective.
Yeah.
It could facilitate their day-to-day operations, but it didn't appear to have much effect on the emergency bit.
Yep.
No alternative solutions were ever applied, and the coroner found having to communicate via an ADF liaison officer, including where the aircrew were not in a position to contact that person directly, was an inadequate way of communicating urgent information.
Yeah, what's the point of having them if you can't contact them?
Day-to-day briefings, fine. Emergency, not fine.
But emergencies really when it's
When
really
you're-
quite important.
Whole employment process was with relation to an emergency possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, the entire reason you're there is because
A risk of emergency.
Yeah.
Correct.
But hindsight, easy to think about that now.
I feel like that's an obvious thing to think about in the
Yeah.
moment before, to be honest,
Yep.
or beforehand.
True.
I feel like if you did a proper risk assessment,
You'd be like, yeah.
likelihood of seeing fire.
Who are we contacting when we actually see the
Correct,
fires? Yeah, true. The nature and scope of any reporting undertaken by the ADF personnel in relation to the fire was also of concern. So during the 17-minute trip back from the site of the ignition of the fire to Canberra Airport, the co-pilot was in regular communication with the Canberra Airport's air traffic control. During this communication, repeated mentions of fire damage to the aircraft was mentioned, but there was no mention of them igniting a fire in the bushland.
And is that potentially because they weren't sure whether they had caused it?
No. They knew they'd caused a fire.
Okay.
Yeah. It wasn't there when they landed. And
Yeah.
then when they took off, it was there.
And it didn't really matter. There was a fire burning when they
Yeah.
left.
And they were talking about the damage to the helicopter
Yeah.
rather than the fact that there was a fire.
Yes. And so I think the air traffic control would have just assumed that their helicopter has caught on fire while they're up. They've never
Yeah.
mentioned that they landed.
Yes,
Right.
true.
It was highlighted over and over again that their concern at that point in that 17-minute trip was their own
Which
safety.
is understandable.
Yes.
And the fact that their vehicle was at risk of catastrophic failure. And, so air traffic control were like, do you need to land somewhere else? Do we need to find other sites for you to be available to land at? All that kind of stuff. Are you going to make it to us?
Yep.
So, I think that it's difficult because they didn't mention the ground was also on fire.
Yes.
But I can understand how their priority was themselves at the same time.
Yeah.
Especially if you're talking to air traffic control. Air traffic control is there to control the air traffic.
Yes.
They're not there to do anything about fires on the ground.
No.
Yeah.
And also,
They could have.
They could have, yes.
17 minutes it's
That
a long
long.
time, but it's not a huge amount of time to be canvassing
Yeah.
everything. And you think about, they've probably got all these checklists and things that they're also going through at the same time, like for emergency landings and
Yeah.
all that sort of stuff. They could have definitely mentioned it, even in passing, but you can also see how it wasn't front of mind.
So weirdly though, so you say the air traffic control aren't there to do other stuff. Across their communication, they were able to organise for a firefighting crew to be on site when the helicopter landed. Because the helicopter was on fire.
Yeah, in the
Or had been
context
on
of
fire.
the airport and the aircraft rather
Yes.
than
The
the
landing.
land.
Yeah,
But it's at what point did they say, do you want fireys? Did you not be
Yeah.
like, yes, and for the big one that we left behind?
Yeah.
But I might be stretching here, and this might not be completely accurate, but I feel like when you call an emergency landing, it's an automatic, procedure that fireys attend.
Based on the it had a detailed script in the inquest.
Yeah.
It was someone specifically being like, do you want fireys?
Okay.
And the co-pilot saying, yes, I would like them, please.
Okay. But I'm pretty sure for most emergency landings,
It's
it's
just a
procedure
default
that there's emergency
fire
services
on
on the ground when the aircraft lands.
So just prior to the landing, the co-pilot sent a message to their task unit stating the need for an emergency landing due to external fire damage. Again, no mention of the bushfire was made. On landing, the co-pilot informed the fire commander present at the Canberra airport that Angel 21 had started a fire. At this point, though, they didn't give the GPS coordinates of the fire.
Come on!
The fire commander dispatched a response from this point, including calling the ACT emergency services. And this was at 2:19, so this is like quite a while after.
Yeah.
Slightly earlier at 2:06, the pilot of Angel 21 had also contacted the operations officer of their task unit to inform them of the GPS coordinates of the fire, which was captured from the metadata of the photographs that they took. So the point of them taking the photograph was that they could pinpoint like exact GPS coordinates.
Which is good.
Yes, very helpful. So the first observation of the fire by anyone other than those on board Angel 21 was an observer at the Mount Tennant Fire Tower. They notified the emergency services at 1:48, 9 minutes after the fire was ignited.
So wait. So we have specified fire towers?
Yeah, sounds like they're like lookouts where you can...
looking out for fires.
I assume in the context of this having been like a 3-month emergency, maybe it's literally like a water tower where like they've established, like I don't know if it's always a fire tower versus like it's a tower that they've named a fire tower in the context of someone's watching out for stuff in this period of time. But anyway.
Someone saw a fire.
Well, someone saw smoke.
And also in 9 minutes, it was big enough
for them to see smoke. Yeah. Based on this report, 3 minutes later, the emergency services dispatched firefighting services to the Baroomba Rocks area. And this is because they didn't really know, like they've just got someone from a tower being like, I can see a fire.
Over there, or there's smoke over there. Yep.
Further firefighting units were then dispatched at 1:53, 1:54 and 1:56. And at this time, the emergency services were still speculating as to the exact location of the fire.
Because they hadn't got the coordinates yet.
They had not. At 2:04, the observer from the fire tower called back and confirmed that the location was 6 kilometres from their location. And so this was then broadcast to all the attending units. And by 2:11, attending fire crews had requested additional resources, including a bulk water tank. So things were getting pretty crazy pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Wasn't until 35 to 45 minutes later, after the ignition of the fire, the exact grid point at which the fire ignited was relayed to the ADF officer embedded in the emergency services communication centre to then be passed over to the civilian services. It wasn't until 9 hours and 9 minutes after the ignition at 10:45 in the evening that the emergency controller overseeing the bushfire prevention activities became aware of the cause of the fire.
Ooh.
Don't get me wrong, they're like the highest up person.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it
seems
have
like
taken
it didn't
9 hours.
Yeah, it didn't trickle up to them for a while. At the inquest, the crew members were questioned about why the fire was not reported prior to landing at Canberra Airport. All consistently reported that their priority was their own safety, as we've already mentioned. The pilot accepted that there was an opportunity to convey the fact that the fire had been ignited by the aircraft, both in exchanges with the air traffic control and the text which the co-pilot sent to their task unit officer. However, again, he stated that he was primarily concerned that the helicopter, and I quote, could fall from the sky at any moment.
Yeah, and I get the two pilots have the hardest job at that point when they're still in the air because they're the ones trying to keep it in the air. Yeah. Everyone else in the back, though, isn't really doing anything.
So that's where it became a little bit more contentious because basically a lot of the crew members in the back were essentially saying that their understanding would be that it would be the pilot's responsibility and that they wouldn't enact or initiate anything unless
they were told to do so by the pilot.
Right.
Exactly.
Which also makes sense.
It does, but also the pilot's got a lot going on.
Yeah. And I also don't know what the crew were doing in the back in terms of, because like two of them had their heads hanging out trying to check the safety of the helicopter, So then that only leaves the other two. Well, what are the other two? Are they holding the feet of the two that are hanging out? Like,
they wouldn't have been hanging out there for that long, though. They would have just done a quick check, and then they would have all come back inside.
Yeah.
But then they would have been reporting, like, going back to the pilot.
The other thing was, again, all of the directives say only contact ADF.
Yeah, true.
So the crew not in the cockpit conceded that external communication was not specifically prohibited, but that they expected that to fall on the pilot. But they also didn't have a lot of, like, options as to who they would have contacted in that instance. Yeah. One crew member did appear to have attempted to call another ADF member on the ground at 1:34 from their mobile whilst in the aircraft, but it was not answered, and then no text message was left and no further was done from that communication perspective. So the coroner found that just as one would expect any ordinary citizen to report a significant fire to the relevant authorities, it was reasonable to expect ADF personnel to do so as well.
Yes.
The coroner found the aircraft captain and those aboard the Angel 21 also had an obligation to consider the risk to the Army and emergency services personnel on the ground. So they weren't the only helicopter around, and they weren't the only people organising or participating in this kind of emergency reconnaissance, etc. So there were more than likely people within that national park and helicopters around that could have been affected by this fire and how quickly it spread. The coroner found it was not plausible that no consideration was given to the significance of the fact that the actions of the crew, inadvertent and anticipated though they were, had caused a major fire, and it was implausible that they did not appreciate the need to bring that fire to the attention of those who may be able to control it. The coroner stated that the failure of the Angel 21 crew members to report the fire at the earliest opportunity was an error of judgment.
Yep.
The coroner concluded that efficient communication of the fire would have been facilitated by a clearer directive to communicate directly to the ADF commander in the event of an emergency requiring action by civilian authorities. A direct contact for the incident management team would have also readily facilitated early reporting of the fire. Ultimately, despite the delay in reporting between the ADF and the state emergency services, the coroner found no significant impact on the response to the fire occurred. The coroner also added that the spread of the fire was exponential because of the location of its ignition and difficulty in responding quickly to that location. So therefore, ultimately, their delay in informing everyone and the delay in response
didn't impact the outcome
because of where it was. Yeah, the coroner did emphasise that early reporting of any fire is beneficial.
Absolutely.
And that this accords with common sense.
Yes.
So finally, the coroner gave some recommendations. And I'm just going to preface with a little statement that they put before their recommendations because I find them funny in relation to the actual recommendations they gave. So the coroner said that their recommendations must be sufficiently specific to arise from the circumstances of the inquiry, but sufficiently general so that they are likely to be beneficial in future circumstances, which will almost never be identical. Makes sense. Highly unlikely that another helicopter is going to land and set a fire with a light if it's never caused such a big fire before. And that they should be intended to address issues of public safety which are capable of practical implementation. So the coroner recommended, where defence assistance to the civil community is involved, a briefing as to particular known risks associated with the planned operation should be incorporated into mission-level assessments. So in particular, risk assessments for unplanned landings in bushfire-prone zones should be provided and incorporated as part of the pre-flight authorisation process. And I was like, how often do we get the Army involved in risk assessments for bushfire-prone zones?
Not often.
Consideration should be given to incorporating a procedure for reporting unplanned aircraft landings during defence assistance to the community operations, internally to both the ADF and concurrently to relevant civilian authorities, including whether prior approval is required and by whom and in what circumstances, as in prior approval to land. Again, with the how often does that happen? Hopefully they should take care of that, but then the Army decided not to update their SOP anyway about whether they need prior approval to land. When providing assistance, the ADF should consider including an emergency procedure protocol in the operation's standard operating procedures, including arrangements for the direct reporting of incidents that create an immediate and obvious risk to the public and civilian authorities. So that one's pretty general and reasonable, that just because you're part of the army doesn't mean that you can't report to civilian authorities. As part of any fire-related standard operating procedures, aircraft captains should be directed to provide GPS locations of any fire that they ignite or observe in accordance with the above protocol as soon as practical. I'm like,
Yes.
yes, anyone who sees a fire should report the fire.
Yes. Even if it's already been reported and you don't know that.
The ADF and the ACT should liaise regarding the most effective direct line of communication to implement between the ADF aircraft and civilian authorities. And then the ADF should create a process whereby learnings from review of incidents relating to a particular resource be considered in a service-wide context as to whether the learnings have or are likely to have application in respect to other resources. So essentially, the Black Hawk incident should have been learnt from and implemented. And then just a final fun fact is that the MRH 90s were permanently grounded by the ADF earlier in 2025, entirely unrelated to the inquest, but that they therefore will be unlikely to cause similar problems in the future.
Why were they grounded?
I don't know. It didn't say.
That's maybe why their cost-benefit analysis didn't go ahead in terms of LEDs.
But that was in 2020 that they did the cost-benefit analysis, so they still used them for 4 years.
They might have still been planning to decommission them, though.
Well, it said factors unrelated to this inquiry. And so I wonder if there's something else that happened.
Yeah.
But anyway. So the recommendations I found a little bit inconsistent with what the coroner set out to do based on what they stated to begin with in terms of making them sufficiently broad, because they all seemed fairly specific to communications with ADF and civilian authorities. But I guess I don't know how often the army's brought in to help with these kinds of emergency services.
Especially in that region as well.
And in relation specifically to a bushfire, because a lot of them mention fire and bushfire.
Whereas the ADF, like when there's bad floods, the ADF will help with that. But obviously that's not fire related.
And so therefore these recommendations are too specific to apply to that, but you would hope that they would be taken on to still be a
sort of
learning
any
process.
sort of emergency response that the ADF is assisting with, which is a lot of the emergency responses ADF assist with.
Yeah. Anyway, that was my inquest that involved no deaths. Thanks for listening, everyone, and we will catch you again next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.